Hi, I'm Jason, and you're listening to the Slippery Slope. I just decided I want to start doing some more things on YouTube, so I want to try and do at least one or two episodes on YouTube every week. Generally, I just do the podcast, which gets released on Spotify and Anchor and Apple and all that stuff, but I've always tried to steer clear of YouTube a little because so many people seem to get banned for some of the comments they make and some of the topics they try and tackle. But who knows? I might get banned. I'll try it anyway. So yeah, I just wanted to go through just what I spoke about today on the latest podcast on the slippery slope, and that's just regarding a couple of things that Scott Morrison and our Prime Minister, for those who aren't in Australia watching, so our Prime Minister Scott Morrison, as we lovingly refer to as ScoMo, and also Defence Minister, I think it is, Peter Dutton, some comments that they made. I'll go through these different articles and just lay out some of my points of view. So this one's from skynews.com.au. It talks about Scott Morrison slammed after criticising Queensland's mandatory vaccination laws. So Deputy Premier, so it's the Deputy Premier of Queensland, Stephen Miles, has accused Prime Minister Scott Morrison of siding with anti-vaxxers and undermining the Queensland's vaccine rollout after the Prime Minister criticised the state's mandatory vaccine laws. So in comments made on Thursday, Morrison urged leaders to relax vaccine measures, saying that Queenslanders should be allowed to get a cup of coffee in Brisbane regardless of whether you've had a vaccine or not, once the state reaches 80% double dose vaccination. The Prime Minister's remarks sparked the ire of Queensland officials, with Mr Miles saying, "We want people in Brisbane to get a coffee too. We just don't want them to get COVID while they're doing it." So that's what the Deputy Premier says. And as I said before, people are responsible for their own health, and you still need to be responsible when you go out. It's not up to the state to make sure you're going to be safe when you're going out to get a coffee. Not really. You've still got to make these decisions for yourself. So the next article I want to go through was, so it was, the title is just talking about Peter Dutton, and it's the title's Coalition opposes excluding the unjabbed. So Defence Minister Peter Dutton doesn't want people who refuse a COVID-19 jab segregated from society amid accusations the government is undermining the vaccine rollout. So just goes through how ScoMo, like I said, Prime Minister, had come under fire for calling the scrapping of Queensland's vaccine mandate. So Mr. Dutton stresses the proportion of people declining to get the jab is small and they need to be allowed to participate in society, which I agree with. He goes on to say, you cannot segregate a part of the community even if you disagree with the decision. So at some stage, he goes on to say, at some stage you've got to allow people to come back into society. And you want them to be vaccinated, but there's a small portion who will make a decision not to be. So, and that's a good point. You know, this allowing people to come back into society. So obviously Dutton and ScoMo, they're the federal Liberal Party. They're our federal leadership at the moment. And the thing is, you've got all these states, especially the Labor ones, but even the Liberal one, like in New South Wales, wanting to, even though they've hit these really high marks in vaccines percentages, they still want to keep people segregated. And like Dutton says here, you've got to allow these people back into society. It was the Victorian Labor Premier, Dan Andrews. He'd made some comments, and they really sounded more like threats. Saying that, people who aren't vaccinated, they're not going to be, you're not going to be able to wait it out, and they're just not going to be allowed out. And then he it seemed like something might have clicked in his head that made him realize, hey, what you're saying sounds more like it's very threatening. And then he turned it at the last second and says, because Delta is coming. And Delta's the reason why you can't come out. And he started blaming Delta. But realistically, it's these premiers that are making these rules, that are making these mandates, and not allowing the people of Australia not to go out because they've chosen something for their own bodies. They've chosen not to get vaccinated. And it's my opinion, you need to be able to make these choices for yourself. It's your body, okay? And if the risk is so great, well then that's got to be up to you. It has to be up to you. It's your body. Anyway, this article goes on to say that the Deputy Labor leader, so Richard Marles, accused the coalition, that's the coalition is who, for all you international listeners, is who ScoMo, Scott Morrison and Dutton belong to the coalition. So he's accused the coalition of picking a fight with Labor states, saying that this undermines the vaccine rollout that is going on in WA and Queensland. And look, maybe they are picking a fight, whatever, but you've got to have that point of difference. We generally have a two-party system. We have other smaller parties, and obviously that's how we've got this coalition that runs. But you've got to be able to have this difference. Otherwise, what's the point? They seem so much the same. You don't even know if there's any difference at all between the parties sometimes. So, for one, I think you've got to have this difference. You've got to have this leadership with it all. It's good to see some leadership from the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, and Peter Dutton calling out that, hey, you've got these high vaccination rates, and so, if these things are so trustworthy, if they're so good, we've been pushing it for so long, you can't hold back the rest of society who choose their own free will, supposed to live in a free society, to not get vaccinated. So I think it's good that we finally got some leadership coming from the Prime Minister, because he seemed to, some of his ideas, he seems to lack some leadership sometimes, let's put it that way. I don't want to say anything too negative about him, but yeah, he does seem to lack leadership sometimes. But also too, the Prime Minister, I've done a podcast. You can listen to an earlier podcast I've done, and some of the things the issues that we've had with vaccine mandates, really could be pointed back as being partly his fault. He's the one that made some comments last year saying, we've got that we won't be able to have, or we won't have vaccine mandates. But then he went on to say, but businesses can bring it in themselves. So he seemed to be trying to have it both ways, that, government, or federal government at least, because he knew that federal government can't and won't mandate it. But he knew very well that businesses could mandate it. And so it seems like he was trying to say, well, he's trying to be the good guy. No, federal government, we won't mandate it. But businesses might do it, because he knew very well that businesses could do it. And he was trying to give them the little thumbs up that, I didn't do that, businesses, and we'll support you. So now they're coming out and saying, well, we can't have segregation. We need to allow people out. And look, I think it's just about time that federal leaders stood up and started speaking out against these vaccine mandates, and against the mandates, and pointing out that we can't segregate society forever. You need to allow people out. That's just my opinion. It's about time they stood up and said something against it. And people need to be responsible. This is one thing that we have to acknowledge, and state governments need to acknowledge that people need to be responsible for their own health, and they're responsible for their own bodies. And government should get out of this mindset that they are responsible for individual health. You are not. Everyone has a time in this world, and everyone will die. Okay? And it's not up to government. It's not up to government to dictate when people can live and when people can die. And people make choices for themselves. So anyway, look, this is all just my opinion. You don't have to agree with me. But all I'm saying is it's good to see some kind of leadership on this subject coming from our Prime Minister, ScoMo. Thanks for listening to The Slippery Slope. Have a good weekend.